England, I frequently get asked the question, what football team do you support? And with people speaking my native language and saying the word football instead of soccer, which is very accommodating. And even though I'm a pretty big sports fan, I would have to answer that I'm not a soccer fan. I would have to answer that I grew up supporting rugby. I'm a rugby fan. And then I proceed to tell people all about my rugby team. And surprisingly, many people had heard of my rugby team. Now you see, I grew up in a home where my dad supported a rugby club, a local rugby club, rather than a soccer team. And therefore we went to games together since I was a child. So after some time, I also supported that rugby team. I met an awesome group of friends there, so I stuck around supporting our team, especially because of all the friends that I had made there. Well, my not being a soccer fan changed last weekend when a friend invited me to a Philadelphia Union game. Now when I got there, I saw shirts that said the word dupe. I'll say it again, dupe. I was clueless as to what that meant. And then the Union scored. And I finally understood what dupe was, as the entire stadium burst out into that celebratory song. You know, the Philadelphia Eagles have the fight song, which I proudly sing during those games, which we did not get the opportunity to sing yesterday whatsoever. And so as the Philadelphia Eagles have the fight song, so the Philadelphia Union has the Duke song. And it's quite contagious, as I also ended up very enthusiastically singing it during that game last week. And just like that, I became a jersey-wearing, baseball hat-wearing, die-hard Philadelphia Union fan. The same friends added me to a group chat where we were able to watch Wednesday's game separately but together and chat about the plays and then commiserate that tonight's game, the game that's on tonight, is going to be for the third place position in the cup rather than the cup final. But you know what? That's okay, because we have a revenge match against Columbus, which was a team that beat us last week, this coming Wednesday. Now, I want to apologize, because I know I probably lost a whole bunch of you there simply by talking about sports. So I want to apologize for that. But the message today is on the subject of belonging. Now, I frequently say to patients that we become who we surround ourselves with. And whether that's family of origin or our friends, we can often become swept into their interests, their hobbies, or their beliefs, just because of our association with them. And likewise, they can become swept into our interests, hobbies, and beliefs also. For example, when we're growing up, some of our earliest beliefs will stem from what our families teach, whether that's love, neglect, or indifference, whether it's a sports team, whether it's a religious or political belief, or values from a more secular path. This becomes our normal and creates a pretty immediate sense of belonging to our immediate family. However, as we meet people outside our family systems, friends in school maybe to begin with, we begin to experience different ideas, different beliefs, different family systems. We begin to feel the pull of wanting to belong to a particular social group or community. Again, we become who we surround ourselves with. And let's face it, it can be easy when people like us and we feel as if we fit in with them, which may create that sense of belonging. But there may also be times when a group of people won't accept us unless we become like them, which means we have to change, and not necessarily because we want to, but because of a desire to fit in, to be like those people. Now, it's one thing to say you want to play soccer like Jose Martinez or sing like Taylor Swift, for example. And if no one's putting that pressure on you, then that's your choice to live into becoming someone who aspires to those dreams. But if you're changing yourself to try and fit in with a group of people, and it seems that no matter what you do, it's just not good enough, or you keep trying until you get that acceptance that you're looking for, then as I said, you're trying to fit in. Brené Brown says it nicely in her book, The Gifts of Imperfection. Fitting in is about assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be in order to be accepted. Belonging, on the other hand, doesn't require for us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. Part of the reason that any recovery program or treatment center exists is to help people recognize that they're not alone in their journey. And that whether you're still under the influence, if you walk into a meeting or treatment, or you've been sober for a period of time, you are welcome and you do belong. We become who we surround ourselves with. When we're simply trying to please others, we limit the possibilities of who we are. When we become open to others teaching us, we can make a more informed decision as to whether this new idea, value, or even soccer team is something we feel a sense of connection to for ourselves. Again, as Brené Brown said, fitting in is about assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be in order to be accepted. Belonging, on the other hand, doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. Belonging is a state of self-discovery between us and the people we surround ourselves with. As noted initially, we are surrounded by our family, and their influence can be positive or less than positive on us. They may accept us for who we are or not. We may have to change our face, change who we are to try and fit in with them or not. But as we grow up and want social connections, forming bonds with others outside of the family system, we may feel more pressure to conform because we discover those things about us that we may truly love or feel shame about. Shame can start creeping in when we feel different. Our differences are what separate us from others. And in those differences, we may feel a longing to fit in and become like who we may think others are, or who they expect us to be. Or we may do the opposite and entirely rebel, feeling that there's no point and we'll never get the acceptance we're looking for anyway. Going back to some of the early days of recovery programs, a guy called Eddie Thatcher went to a meeting called the Oxford Group. 3 things the Oxford Group focused on included a set of values which they encouraged their members to live into to the very best of their abilities. Another one was a source of guidance that person attending the meeting could build a relationship with, which would help remind that person that they had a choice better than the potential impulsive action they were about to take. And the third big thing, was that of community. As many have heard me said lots of times, the opposite of addiction is connection. This is a quote that was made famous by British journalist Johann Hari in a TED Talk. The opposite of addiction is connection. In one sense, it could be the idea of connecting with something outside of oneself that could be that source of guidance during challenging times. The idea that it may want something better than what we may want for ourselves in some moments. It can remind us of that choice, which is ours to freely make. And with regards to community, the idea that there may be others in the world that have lived through similar experiences to us. It can help remind us that we're not the only ones going through this. We're not alone in this experience. But also, the shame that we may feel is related to having felt that we are the only ones going through a particular experience. Whether a family member or a person living with their own use disorder, we have felt the struggle of feeling like we are the only ones going through our challenges. And so maybe we slapped on a mask to try and fit in as we kept on trying to live what we felt was as normal a life that we could in the real world, whereas underneath, we may have been struggling. In the words of Sia, because I think most people know by now I love quoting music quotes, from her song Unstoppable, all smiles, I know what it takes to fool this town. I'll do it till the sun goes down and all through the nighttime. I'll tell you what you want to hear. Leave my sunglasses on while I shed a tear. It's never the right time. I put my armor on to show you how strong I am. Now the song continues stating that she's unstoppable, but all the time she's wearing a mask, her armor to try and fit in, rather than the open arms of simply accepting who she is, brokenness and all, and finding the people who can accept her for who she is. Shame is that which seeks to separate us from others and make us wear a mask and this heavy, heavy armor so that we can fit in and not be our true selves. We cannot simply be who we are. Now, I've said it before, when we feel vulnerable, we tend to put that armor on and hide behind it, rather than allow ourselves to be open to risking that vulnerability so that others can see what may be hiding beneath our surface. In a reading entitled Bound by Brokenness by Ron Johnson, who worked for the Samaritan Center, a man shared with his therapist that he believed he was too broken to be fixed, as he shared of his broken heart, broken relationships, and broken spirit. Now this can relate to so many people who have lived with alcohol or substance use disorder, as well as their families. Broken relationships is a disease. Disorder seeks to push people away from each other, no matter how much you want the help or you want to give the help. Broken relationships that can lead to broken hearts and eventually, once hope is fading, a broken spirit. Johnson goes on to say, in many of our communities, even acknowledging brokenness is not welcome or safe. To expose vulnerability is to invite judgment, risk shame, or fear, standing out as the only one. And he adds that for some, counseling is one of the few places where their fractures are felt and their brokenness is bared. Now, I want to take that one step further and add that it's not just in professional counseling that fractures can be felt and brokenness be bared. It's also in the community of people who have already walked the path. Again, whether someone's living with their own use disorder or a family member, when we realize that we're not alone on that journey and find others whose experiences have been similar to our own, we feel seen, witnessed, and we get given the opportunity to begin to rid ourselves of that shame. This quote from the article Bound by Brokenness stands out the most to me, and it reads, I recall that often the difference between a suffering which destroys us and a suffering which transforms us begins with the presence of a caring, thoughtful other who is willing to acknowledge that brokenness with us. In Eddie Thatcher's case, he stayed away from his close drinking buddy named Bill Wilson until he felt strong enough to see him, sit with him, and tell him that he was now sober. Thanks to this community of people that he'd met and the source of guidance that he called God, both of which he was building a relationship with and looking to for guidance, support, and following insight that those people had done to help get them sober. Now, despite sitting at Bill's kitchen table with Bill offering him an alcoholic beverage, Eddie was able to refuse. And just like the Brené Brown quote said, he didn't judge Bill or look down on him or even try to talk him into anything. He just told him what he had been able to do to get help. Even highlighting the concept of God in the Oxford group was not necessarily a religious figure, though it could be if a person had a faith that was important to them. Because of one caring, thoughtful other, in this case Abby Thatcher, who took the time to go and see his old friend Bill Wilson, Bill was able eventually to get sober by utilizing that program and his own concept of higher power, which eventually led him to having a similar experience with Dr. Bob when Bill was in Ohio and away from his own community. Bob was a doctor, and the community he lived in and his wife were all worried about him. Now, they invited Bill to meet with Bob, and when Bill was looking for someone to talk to, and I guess they were hoping that Bill was going to be some legalistic, hardcore, tell Bob what to do sort of person. But Bill wasn't that sort of person. Instead, he told Bob, just like Abby Thatcher before him, how he got sober, recognizing the struggles and the experience, recognizing how hard it was, but it was increasingly meaningful at the same time. This ultimately led Bob to not kicking him out, which was actually the plan in place when he'd originally asked his wife to come in with a fake phone call saying, "Oh, Bob, the hospital needs you." And he was going to kick Bill out, but he didn't, because he was interested, because they were sharing stories, anecdotes, experiences. And eventually the two of them would go to hospitals where men, because at this time, women, if they were drinking privately at home, and that's a whole other story about shame and being able to be public about drinking. At that time, men who were being brought into the hospitals after a heavy night of drinking, they would share their stories, including opening up about their feelings of brokenness and shame that led them to recognizing none of them were alone in this journey. And their lives did not have to stay stuck in the brokenness that any of them were feeling. And ultimately, all of this together led to the creation of Alcoholics Anonymous. You see, when people start to form these connections, when we find those caring, thoughtful others to accompany us on our journeys, to help us learn how to become our biggest cheerleaders, and help us learn how to take accountability for ourselves, or even in the case of some sports term, teach us how to sing the Duke song. We begin to recognize that we are not alone in our experience. We move beyond the suffering that may have sought to destroy us, and we begin to find transformation and a sense of belonging as a part of a community of something much bigger than us, but something that we can begin to call home, as we recognize there is something bigger than us that we do belong to, and it welcomes us and our loved ones. Communities of support, in whatever form they take, whether geared towards those living with a use disorder or family members, help us know that although there can and will be suffering in our lives, there are also people who have been there before us and can show us what they did to transform themselves from the suffering. They can show us how to move beyond shame and put on an armor of hope and love rather than an armor that hides our true selves from the world. They can show us how to do difficult things that we otherwise might not be able to do on our own. They can help us move beyond the shame and suffering that seeks to destroy us and towards a suffering that can become transformational to us. As we remember one of the quotes I said earlier, we become who we surround ourselves with. Who do we want to become? Do we want to surround ourselves with people who are going to hold us back? Now, sometimes it's difficult to give those people up. We may have known them from a really long time. And it's okay to feel grief if we recognize that we might have to step away from those relationships for a time or for longer. Eddie Thatcher stepped away from his friendship with Bill W. I'm sure he felt grief around that. Or are we going to learn to surround ourselves with people who are going to help us find that better part of ourselves, those people that are going to help us grow and live into being the most authentic version of who we are, and even if we don't know who that person is yet. I want to quote another song at this time. Bruce Springsteen. I just got to see him in concert on Friday. It was phenomenal. If you get the chance, I highly recommend you go. But this song is related to 9/11, and it has its anniversary coming up in a few short weeks. It speaks not only of how the power of how community members and emergency responders can come together to help others, but it also reminds us that there are loved ones that answer the call and worry about their family member charging into the flames. From his song, Into the Fire, may this quote remind us of the type of community that we are seeking is the one that helps us grow. May the source of guidance that we may be seeking, by whatever name we may call it, be the one that helps us grow. Here's the quote. May your strength give us strength. May your faith give us faith. May your hope give us hope. May your love give us love. And may you find the people, the communities, and the source of strength, hope, faith, and love that can lead you to the transformation that you and all of us deserve. Amen.